Welcome to Globespan Television. Good evening, everyone. We are broadcasting live from New York City. And this program has been made available by our sponsors and operated by Mr. Noor Singh, the CEO, and our technical directors, Mr. Devin Bissoon and Mr. Ryan Gobin. Tonight we have two guests. Both are commissioners from GECOM, Mr. Clement Roy, a former minister, and Mr. Vincent Alexander. But before we get to them, I want to let you all know that the views expressed by our guests tonight are theirs and not those of the management and staff of Globespan Television. And to let everyone know, we are a fair and balanced network. We will broadcast fairly and balanced so that everyone can listen to our views. We do not take sides. So that's one of the things that we rest our morals on. So before we get going tonight, topic will be on GECOM and its functions and responsibilities and so forth, especially in this upcoming elections. So before we get to the topic, I would like to welcome Mr. First of all, I would like to apologize for last week because my voice, it was in a mess. Tonight, I hope you're all hearing me louder and clearer and better. Tonight, I want to welcome Mr. Vincent Alexander, former registrar of the University of Guyana, and now a commissioner at GECOM, and Mr. Clement Roy, former Minister of Home Affairs, and now a commissioner of GECOM. Gentlemen, welcome you both.
Thank you very much.
Now, my first question, I want to ask Mr. Roy, if you don't mind. But first of all, I want to salute both of you for being courageous and bold to come on this program to debate the issues. Well, not really to debate, but to outline your views on what's happening with GECOM. We normally don't have two people from the different political parties discussing anything. One party or the other will always be scared to come on our program. So I thank you all for that tonight. Mr. Roy.
Mr. Rohi.
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 Right. I see you're growing a lot of beard now. Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think that the present formula of GECOM, having three commissioners from each of the two major parties, are a wise idea?
Well, we have to work with what we have at present. Until such time as there is an amendment to the Constitution to allow for changes to take place in respect of the composition of the current composition of the Elections Commission. So that what we have now is what we have to work with. Without repeating myself, until such time that the constitutional amendments are made to facilitate whatever changes that may be agreed to, fundamentally, first of all, at the political level. Because remember, in the parliament, there are political parties represented there. And I would want to assume that even though the commission will be going around the country as what they will usually do to get views from people, from the populace, with respect to what, if a question like that is put to them, then that is returned to the Constitutional Reform Commission for discussion. And if there's no unanimity on it, then obviously there's a vote is taken by the National Assembly on whatever proposals or recommendations that are made. So that is a process that has to be followed. A priori to any changes in the commission's composition is done.
Can you tell our listeners how many votes in Parliament it takes to amend the Constitution?
Well, it depends. It depends. There's some aspects of the Constitution that requires a 2/3 majority, and there's some amendment that require a simple majority. So it depends on the nature of the change that is proposed in respect to the Constitution for that to happen. Like, I mean, there's some very important amendments there that would require 2/3 majority. That is to say, both sides of the House must agree to those amendments. But there's some other, I would want to believe, some minor amendments that could be done that does not require a 2/3 majority.
But what would it take to amend the Constitution for GECOM to change the formula?
That I think would require that, as I said before, we have to look at the process that has to take place before, which is a consultative process with the populace, where they are invited, whether individually or collectively as an organization, to propose changes. Those changes are then discussed at the level of the Constitutional Reform Commission, however it is comprised. And then it moves from there. It's taken from there. Whatever the changes that are required, and that is where it has to follow from. It has to flow from there.
So this was put in the Constitution in 2000 when it was actually some little changes made to the Constitution.
That was agreed prior to the 1992 elections by both political parties.
Okay.
And that's how it was enshrined. That is where those aspects, clauses, or provisions of the Constitution that are enshrined require a 2/3 majority. And that is one of the provisions that was enshrined owing to the agreement of the political parties. That is what we're living with at this point in time.
Okay. Mr. Alexander, over the years, or since 1992 when GECOM came into existence, due to the Carter Center, who designed this program, in most cases, voting at the commissioners level tends to lead to gridlock, meaning because each commissioner will vote along party lines in most cases. So do you think it's a wise idea to continue with this formula?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, before I answer that question, may I add to a previous answer?
Go ahead.
Our Constitution requires has three methods for amendment: a referendum, a two-thirds majority, or a simple majority. So we also, in addition to what was said, have a referendum. And there's some aspects of the Constitution.
I have to thank Vincent for that one. I forgot that one.
Okay, go ahead.
There's some aspects of the Constitution that are related to GECOM, which in fact fall under the category of a referendum. For example, the provision of Article 159, which speaks to the citizens' right to vote, that requires a referendum. On the other hand, Article 73, which speaks to the regions and the residency, requires a two-thirds majority. Also, the principles, underlying principles of the Constitution, and the provisions for sovereignty, the name of the country, the coat of arms, etc., they all require a referendum to be changed. And probably the only reason why some of them have not been changed, or the reason why some of them have not been changed, is that though there was agreement during the last constitutional reform process for a number of changes, the referendum has never been held, and therefore those changes have never been made. So, for example, a decision was made to change the name of the country from the Cooperative Republic, but that requires a referendum. That has not been held. A decision was made.
By the way, who made that decision, though?
This was an agreement at the level of the select committee and what was put to the parliament. What was put to the parliament?
To change it to what?
The Republic of Guyana. The Republic of Guyana.
Just the Republic of Guyana, remove
Yes,
cooperative.
yes.
Okay.
So that was one. Another one, for example, was the question of free education. The proposition was, in fact, to change that one as well, in terms of free education being available to everyone. I don't remember exactly the wording that we came up with, but free education was also one of that would have been affected had there been a referendum. So that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, in response, direct response to your question, I would answer the question this way. We're working with what we have. We're working with what we have. I don't necessarily agree that we should work with what we have. I think there should be advocacy for change. Now, what change am I talking about? I don't think the way in which our constitution, our commission is constituted is the best formulation. 3 persons nominated by the governing party, 3 persons nominated by the opposition, and a chairperson who is picked from a list submitted to the president by the leader of the opposition, with some caveats in terms of what background that person should have. And largely it points towards someone who has a legal background. The fact of the matter is that given the nature of Guyana, and the nature of our politics, the present way in which it is constituted literally leaves the decision-making to one person, and that's the chairperson. And so the chairperson becomes a critical element in this process. The conduct of the chairperson, the culture of the chairperson has a tremendous impact on our country. So, for example, if we go back to Chairperson Suresh Bali, I entered GECOM under his chairmanship. Chairperson Suresh Bali always sought consensus, always sought to have a debate. He himself led to that debate and sought to drive us in the direction of a consensus. And I can only recall one occasion when, in fact, he had to use a casting vote in the decision-making process when he was at GECOM during my term. So that is critical, because if I were to speak about the current chairperson also has the casting vote that everybody would have had. And in fact, not even at the level of the casting vote, at the level of the first round of voting. Everybody never cast the vote in the first instance. He sought consensus. And what he did, on one occasion, he had to cast a vote. But that was not a casting vote. He still had, if the need arose, a casting vote. We have a situation now where almost every issue, the chairperson has the deciding vote. Almost every issue, the chairperson has a deciding vote. And almost on every issue, there is no consensus, and there is no active involvement of the chairperson in the process, bringing to bear reason, bringing to bear ideas. What the chairperson does is to sit back like a judge and literally say to us, you guys having given your views, having in some regards cast your vote, which is more than often 3-3, I will give a ruling. She then goes and writes what she calls a ruling, and that in fact constitutes the decision. So that I would argue that we have a number of issues. One, we have a constitutional body, which for good reason at the time in 1992 was constituted essentially by people who came through nominations of the political leaders. But that is not ideal. It's not ideal. And it has certainly led to where we're at, a very fractured commission, which I think needs to be restructured. And I think in restructuring the commission, there are places we can look to for examples of how that restructuring can be done. So, for example, in Jamaica, they have civil society involvement, significant civil society involvement, to the extent that no one political party can, by its vote, determine the outcome of a matter. You have to have votes across the interests, civil society, the political parties. However, given the nature of the elections body, what the political parties have is a veto, so that they can object even if a matter is decided by a majority. But they cannot impose their view. And so it is a mechanism that provides for the commission to seek some form of consensus. So my contention is, in Guyana, we know what we have. We know what we have. And that's something relatively good. If we get a commission that is different, we may not know what we have because of the nature of civil society in Guyana. But I think ideally, we should move towards a system that involves civil society in constituting the commission, and that we should probably have the veto power so that no one political party can complain that decisions were made that are totally against their interests. And I think we also have to look at the manner in which a chairperson is identified, because you don't want a chairperson who is not an active participant in the process. You don't want a chairperson who does not see himself or herself as a commissioner, the first among equals, but sees himself or herself as a judge presiding over a clash of the titans. And so I think that we do not at this time, for more than one reason. For the reason of the role that the chairperson could play, and for the reason of the actual composition and the fractured nature of things, have a commission that serves the purpose that a constitutional commission is intended to serve.
GECOM, as you know,
Before you go on, Mr.
Well.
Moderator, I'd like to
Pardon me?
make an observation. You asked a specific question to me, what I think about the composition of the current Elections Commission. I answered the question. I could have gone on like Mr. Alexander and speak for 10 minutes, getting ahead of questions which I suppose you will come with at some point in time. I didn't. I didn't. So I would like to say that, think that without prejudice to what you have to, the questions you want to ask, that we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. And I say so with all due respect to what Mr. Alexander has been saying. I'd like to make this point quickly. Mr. Alexander said that while he's comfortable, or while we have to work with what we have, we should engage in advocacy. That was not the question that was asked. If you had asked the question that elicited the answer that Mr. Alexander gave, I certainly would have answered that. Suffice it to say that when I joined the Elections Commission for the first time in the 1980s, when Mr. Harold Bollers was the chairman of GECOM, at that time, there was one member from the PNC and one member from the opposition PPP. That came about because, as a result of the talks in around that period, 74 to 76, between Cheddi Jagan and Forbes Burnham, during the period of critical support, that both men came to an agreement with respect to representation of the opposition on boards and constitutional commissions. The PPP was given one seat on the Elections Commission, and I was appointed as that one person to represent the PPP there was no PPPC at that time to represent the PPP on what was then called the Bollers Commission. On that commission, it was the same situation that we have now that Mr. Alexander is referring to, where a judge sat, listened to the arguments of the PPP representative and the PNC representative, and decided what the decision should be. But he used to go even further, where he would say that if any member of the commission wants to have changes to the electoral system or the mandate of the commission, what they should do is take the matter to Parliament. So he would quickly shut down any debate that he considered to be contingent on electoral reform or parliamentary procedures, and suggest or decide that that matter is not relevant for the time at the commission, and that it should be taken to the National Assembly. Now, of course, in those days, while Mr. Barnum was the president, you could hardly imagine anything of that nature being taken to the Parliament for amendment to the Constitution or to the electoral laws, Representation of the People Act. And so Mr. Bollers did what he decided was best for the commission. Later on, the composition of the commission changed again, where you had 3 representatives from the PNC and 3 representatives from the PPP also. That came about again because of a political decision between the 2 political parties. So again, I want to say that notwithstanding whatever advocacy that we might want to engage in or pontificate, for want of a better word, in respect to this particular matter, it can only happen if there is agreement between the political parties in Parliament, however that composition might be, that there must be changes in the composition of the commission, separate and distinct from what obtains now. I don't agree with Commissioner Alexander in respect to the modus operandi with which the chairman operates at the commission. If Commissioner Alexander wishes to have an activist chairman, that by its very nature has complication, just like an activist judge in a court would have difficulties, or with the way the lawyers or the lawyers would have difficulties with such a situation. But if you were to have an activist chairman at the commission engaging in an equal manner with the discussions taking place, without anyone having a decisive vote on what the decision should be. Because in our situation, we have to bear in mind that everything is politics. All politics is local. And I don't see how decisions could be arrived at in the way in which he's referring to in the case of Jamaica. We have a totally different political situation here. And unless there is some kind of consensus among the political parties, which I don't see happening in the immediate future on this particular matter, then we can wander off in many directions in respect to how we envisage the future or a future election commission be, without addressing the fundamental question, which is, do the political parties agree in the Parliament, or even before the Parliament, in terms of consultation, that they should be?
Let me ask you a question. You said the Bollers' time. What years were the Bollers, Justice Bollers' time? Before 1990, after 1992?
No. That was up to 19 before around 1989, 1990.
Well,
Because
GECOM was created after 1992.
The what?
GECOM was created after 1992.
GECOM was created after 1992 as a
Okay.
result of the agreement of the parties along with the Carter Center.
Okay. Since you're on this topic, and I want you to be brief, GECOM is a creature of the Carter Center, or whatever the Carter people did, and so forth. And our government's opposition and government accepted the proposals put forth by the Carter Center to have 3 commissioners from each political party. My question to you is this. This was almost over 3 decades ago. Don't you think that the system since then has not been working to the best possible because commissioners vote along party lines? Don't you think that this should have been reformed years ago by either the PUP or by APNU? Don't you think?
That is a kind of a loaded question, because the fact of the matter is that it never happened. So if, again, we come back to the question that I pose in the course of my contribution, which is that as long as there's a political stalemate, or unless there's some political decision arrived at on a consensual basis, in or out of Parliament, and before Parliament, the parties agree and takes it to the Parliament. Because, I mean, usually, before, the government could very well take a bill to the Parliament. But then, as we agreed earlier, changes of that nature require a 2/3 majority in the House. So it would be highly irresponsible for any political party to take a bill like that to the National Assembly without having prior discussions, most likely negotiations over a lengthy period, to understand what is it they want to agree to. And then, having agreed to it, whoever is the chief whip or the sitting member of Parliament that would take it to the National Assembly, they would so do in agreement with with whoever might be the opposition. But then we have the experience once, with the when the PPP was in office under the Ramatar administration. We had before the Ramatar administration, we had a problem with the voter ID card, where it was agreed between the 2 political parties that we will take a bill to the National Assembly on the question of the voter ID card. And even when it was agreed, soon after the matter was taken to the court for a judicial review of the introduction of a voter ID card, which was deemed unconstitutional, and that led to a very lengthy court case on that matter. And then later on, there was also a question that was not necessarily related to elections, that had to do with the hydropower station that the government was seeking to build, where under the Ramatar administration, discussions were held at office of the president. It was agreed, then Granger was the opposition leader, that a certain resolution will be taken to the Parliament to treat with how to address the electricity situation in Guyana. And when the Prime Minister, then Sam Hinds, introduced the motion, the opposition, led by Mr. Granger, rejected it, even though there was a political agreement before. So these are things that we have to look out for. These are historical antecedents or precedents that we have to look out for in order to ensure that any matter of the nature that we're discussing now in terms of the reform of the commission, which is a part of electoral reform, is taken to Parliament, that there has to be ironclad agreement between the political parties that no one would renege on what was agreed to when it arrives on the table of the National Assembly.
Mr. Alexander, Mr. Alexander,
Yes, I'm here.
let me ask you this question. How do we have come up a right? How could we have a system whereby we could have voting not along party lines, but strictly based on the issues and in fact?
Let me first of all say, in answering your question, that GECOM has 6 commissioners who, in legal terms, are nominees of the government and the opposition. They are nominees. They are not, in legal terms, representatives. That they behave as if they are representatives is a reflection of the real politic of Guyana.
Right.
But they should, when I look at myself, undoubtedly there's an association between myself and the People's National Congress Reform, the APNU, AFC. Undoubtedly there's an association. But I would think that they nominated me because they thought that I have the kind of thinking power and the kind of culture in terms of constitutional politics that I would contribute to decisions in GECOM independent of any directive coming from the political party. And that is what, in fact, we have to look for. Now, on the question of the chairperson, in the context of what Commissioner Rui has said, Chairman Suresbali could be described as activists. But that notwithstanding, we didn't have the problems that he is suggesting that naturally flow if you have an activist type of chairperson. But for a chairperson to be involved in discussions doesn't mean the chairperson has taken on, in the context of a judge, activist role, because when judges take on activist roles, very often one can see that they tend not to be orthodox or conservative. And it is that speaks to activism. Their involvement in trying to determine the matter is not in itself activism. And so I maintain the position that a GECOM, which has a responsibility to deliver free and fair elections, if it sees that there is something in the laws, even in the Constitution, which inhibit the delivery of a free and fair election, they have a moral, if not a legal responsibility, to bring that to the attention of those people who will have to make the decision. We cannot just sit on our laurels and operate on rules and regulations and even a constitution, which in our deliberate judgment doesn't serve the intended purpose. And so if the political parties at the end of the day don't agree to have a change, then they have to take responsibility for that to the electorate. But we have, as a commission, a responsibility not only to conduct elections, but to make propositions about the manner in which those elections should be facilitated. And by that, I mean even legislative change. We have that responsibility. And that is one area in which our current operation is extremely deficient. There's refusal to make recommendations when there are glaring things that require recommendations. Make them. Let those who are beyond GECOM make the final determination because they have the power to do so. But having said that, I should also say that I don't fall for this system which says that we must have a negotiation between two parties and that's the end of it. Our democracy speaks to inclusion, and that inclusion means that civil society should be involved in the decision-making processes. And whilst the parties may be determinant in some regards, we can't just simply leave it to two parties, particularly given the history which has been referred to make decisions. They will have their final say in the parliament, but their processes in a democracy where responsiveness is one of the pillars of democracy, where we should allow the inclusion of civil society and citizens in these decision-making processes. So it's not for me. I do not have to just concur with what exists and leave it to some other set of people. I reserve the right, and I think GECOM should reserve the right to express a view if they have a view on a matter in national interest. So that in terms of what I proposed earlier, if you have a commission that are not merely nominees of political parties, and worse yet, see themselves as representatives, but a commission that represents various interests. Now, in the conduct of elections, you have issues that are managerial issues. In the operation of GECOM, you have issues that are accounting issues. Obviously, GECOM has legal issues. And so, for me, an election commission with those variety of operations should really consist of people who bring to the table a professional perspective in relation to those issues. So the decision-making could be rather more objective. I haven't canceled out the question of the political parties. I said they have the right of veto. But certainly I don't think they have the right to singularly command the turf, particularly in the circumstance where they're commanding the turf 3-3 and leaving it to a chairperson's culture or manner of conduct to determine national affairs. And that is why I differentiated Suresh Bali from the present chairperson. Suresh Bali could have behaved the same way. He did not. What he did was to seek consensus by not just adjudicating, but by posing questions, juxtaposing things, and sometimes even bringing original ideas to the table. We don't have that today. We have merely a clash of the titans with a judge who, unfortunately, on over 90% of the time, has concurred with one side.
They are
Dr. Suresh Bali was not a judge, was not of a legal background. Where in the Constitution it states that the chairman has to be someone from a legal background? Did it state that?
It doesn't state that specifically, but if one reads the Constitution, it tends in that direction. I don't have the Constitution to quote exactly, but it does tend in that direction. And the fact of the matter is, we've had chairpersons other than legal persons. In Hopkinson, we've had Hopkinson, and we've had Joe Singh. But it tends to point in the direction of a legal person. And in most instances, we've had legal persons.
Mr. Roy, I will ask Mr. Alexander the same question too. How many times since you've been appointed a commissioner, you voted outside of party lines and support the PNC? Mr. Roy.
how many times I voted outside the party and supported the PNC?
At GECOM. Why
would I do something like that? The question could also be asked of Mr. Alexander, how many times he argued outside of the PNC.
I will ask him the question.
It wouldn't happen. That would never happen.
Why?
That would never happen. Unlike what Mr. Alexander is seeking to do, which he has all right to do, which is to distance himself from any political affiliation or receiving political direction from the PNC. That sounds rather strange to me, because most of the arguments, most of the issues that Mr. Alexander and his two colleagues have raised and have championed in the commission are issues that coincide with what the political opposition, namely the AFC, the APNU AFC, and the WPA have been championing outside of the parliament. Even when you have GECOM inviting, let's say, for example, the case where Mr. Nigel Hughes led a delegation of the AFC to the commission. We had a full-blown statutory meeting with the delegation of the AFC present. And we had, in a sense, 3 members of the commission and about 5 members of the AFC jointly taking positions that are, fundamentally speaking, political opposition issues. So we had, from my observation, you had 8 representatives of the opposition speaking to issues that are known publicly to be opposition championed issues. So the point I want to make is for me to take a position against the PPP, against the PPP public statements and position with the General Secretary of the PPP has expressed at a press conference and support the PNC, then I don't know what would be the position. I shouldn't say I don't know what would be the position, but that would be, in a sense, committing political harikari.
So you haven't seen
I don't know if
anything
Mr.
that the
Alexander
PNC
would do something like that either. I haven't heard him at any time.
No, I will ask him
And
the
I haven't
question.
seen him on any time
I will
take
ask
a
him the question.
position against the APNU AFC and the political opposition, supporting the PVP issues raised in the GECOM.
No, I
haven't
will
seen
ask him
that.
the question. But don't you haven't seen any issue that the PNC could raise that you will support a GECOM?
The PNC,
Yes.
not the PNC, but if the members of the commission
You mentioned
raise
the
an
commissioners,
issue,
yes, the commissioners.
yes, if
PNC
commissioners, as Commissioner Alexander pointed out, who speak for themselves, raise an issue. It might be a technical issue. It might be an issue that I have experience on. It might be an issue which I've observed at several elections that I coincide with. Then, perhaps, together with my other 2 colleagues, we would decide how to approach that issue.
Okay. Mr. Alexander, is there any issue that the PP commissioners could propose that you will support at GECOM?
I would have no problem supporting something they propose if I think that it is in the best interests of the operation of GECOM and in the best interest of the country. I'll have no problem with that. And there may be occasions when, in discussions, I have concurred with things that might have been said by them. But indeed, on fundamental issues, we have not had that circumstance. But I would go further to say, in answering your question, that though I will not provide public disclosure, there are instances where my position on the issues at GECOM has not been the same with the People's National Congress. There are issues. I am not prepared at this point for public disclosure in that regard, but to say that there are instances when I have differed with the People's National Congress reform or the APNU or the AFC. And probably I can give an immediate example. The AFC proposed the question of cameras at polling stations. That's a matter in which I had a different view, which I expressed. about the cameras at polling stations. So here is an example. But I want to go on to say further that the nature of my relationship with the PNC is as such that there was a particular time when the leader of the opposition publicly asked for me to demit office at GECOM. Publicly asked for me to demit office. And I publicly refused because I said I was his nominee, but not his representative. I was a constitutional officer. And that when he nominated me, it was a demonstration of confidence that I can uphold the oath of office. And that in that context, his call would not have any impact. I would continue, as I have done, to operate as a commissioner. So my disposition is completely different from those who see themselves purely as representatives. You see, it has to do with political culture. I do not embrace democratic centralism. I embrace democracy. And democracy allows for my behavior to be different to those who embrace democratic centralism and therefore have to toe the party line. I'm not under a whip. But
Okay.
I will listen to, and I will have views that are coincidental with those of the PNC. The fact that I was PNC suggests that we have a similarity of thoughts, and therefore it's almost natural that we will probably take the same positions. But it's not an organic relationship.
Do you think that the chairwoman, retired Justice Claudette Singh, do act in neutral at times on some issues and in the best interest of GECOM or not?
In my view, she's never acted neutrally on any fundamental issue after 2020. That's my strong opinion, and I'll give examples. The appointment in employment is very glaring. The appointment of the CEO of GECOM was done in breach of our own stipulations. We stipulated a number of years that the CEO, the applicant, should have to qualify to be considered for the job. The current CEO did not have the number of years, and I'm prepared for anyone to come and let us go to the documentation in GECOM to determine that matter. But yet, the current person was preferred along with the PPP commissioners, and the rationale given for preferring that person was that whoever gets the job must land running, and that because the current CEO had worked with GECOM previously, then he's better off to land running against the other candidate who was not a Guyanese, but who was far superior both in terms of academic qualifications and in terms of his experience in the conduct of elections. So that's one case. The second case was the case of the DCO. The DCO current, even at the interview, admitted that he had not met the required period of experience for the job. But yet he was given the job, and again, it was a 3-4 situation. So we have had very, very fundamental issues, all of which, and the most recent fundamental issue, well, this one is not necessarily, I don't know how to put it, but the issue of the legal officer. Again, we have a situation with the legal officer where 3 commissioners and the chairperson, a chairperson who had given the legal officer a glowing report, which I had not supported in its entirety. He was given a glowing report. And he has now argued that this report was written after he had written the written submissions for the court. Yet, I would say under pressure, she then changed her own position to support the non-termination of his contract on grounds which I would consider to be fallacious grounds. So no, I have a problem. You know, for example, I sought to have two things discussed in GECOM recently, and I've been greeted with deafening silence. I wanted to discuss the question of the GECOM's protocol in terms of communication and press releases. And I wanted to discuss that question because the press release which the CEO apparently authored, he signed it, got into the public domain on his letterhead on the Attorney General's Facebook. Before it got into the public domain on GECOM's letterhead, as is the current protocol for the issuance of press releases. And when I raised that question, let us see what has gone wrong, that such a press release could first be seen on the Attorney General's Facebook page, and more particularly, seen in its original form, which the CEO has contended he only communicated to the PRO. He said that form it was in on his letterhead was only sent to the PRO. But here is the AG's chambers, the AG's Facebook, showing that very document, which the CEO said was only sent to the PRO, and the PRO said that she sent it to no one else. And I have asked for the matter to be interrogated because it has to do with the integrity of our communication. And in GECOM, communication is critical because integrity could interfere with everything, including the communication of election results. They refused to discuss it. I raised the question of, here is a press release that has damned the LO. Could we internally look at his submissions, his oral submissions, his written submissions, our involvement, to see if it is true that he was in defiance of the CEO? And again, deafening silence. But in each of those instances, the deafening silence is supported by three commissioners. She has clearly, in my view, been biased and or compromised in the manner in which she conducts herself as a chairperson of GECOM. And I've had reason to tell her in a meeting that I find the manner in which she dealt with the LO's thing a demonstration of incompetence.
I just want to
Let me just say a few quick things on that.
Okay, be brief. Okay.
Dr. Rose. First of all, Mr. Alexander should tell you and tell viewers, because I wasn't there and I'd like to know, truthfully, how did Mr. Patterson, as chairman of GECOM, operate at a time when the APNU AFC was in government? We shouldn't skip over that period. We shouldn't gloss over that period either, because it's very important to take notice of that, because in the first place, Mr. Patterson, who is a judge, or was a judge, former judge, was chairman of the same commission, and I don't recall any press statement or any statement from the those who were sitting in the commission as nominees making any objection to his rulings or the position which he adopted. So I think it would be interesting to hear how Mr. Patterson performed as chairman of the commission, as a former judge, bearing in mind what was said earlier about how the commission could be constituted in terms of former judges, or how it is inclined to have retired judges chair commission meetings. That's one. There is also the question of the former CEO, and I don't want to elaborate too much on that because that's a matter now in court. Suffice it to say that he's one of the persons that is now in court in respect to what transpired at the Ashfins building for the 2020 elections, and that speaks volumes. Thirdly, when it came to the question of a new CEO and DCEO, I shouldn't say a difficulty, but the point that I'd like to make is this. Commissioner Alexander speaks in glowing terms, or tends to pat himself on the back in respect to how he views democracy as against what is practiced by other political parties in terms of democratic centralism. But I listened to a program that Mr. Alexander had some time ago with Mr. Joe Paris, where he elaborated on his philosophy in respect to politics and political party politics, and his experience in advancing his philosophical convictions within the party, and the fact that it was rejected. Now, this is exactly what is happening also at the commission level in terms of Commissioner Alexander's understanding of democracy. Mr. Alexander, as a commissioner, is just one voice among 6 commissioners, including the chair. But it doesn't follow ipso facto that because he raises an issue and, in a sense, demands or urges that it be discussed by the commission, that it must be discussed by the commission. If all the other members of the commission does not favor a discussion on an issue that Mr. Alexander raises, then how do we interpret that? Don't they have a democratic right? The other commissions have a democratic right individually to either remain silent or to say no to his entreaties? Of course they do. And I think it is important in the context of our understanding of democracy that at the individual as well as the collective level, persons either at a collective or individual level have the right to express their opinion one way or the other. And if it does not suit what Mr. Alexander seems to be pressing the commission to do, then so be it, because this is how democracy operates. And I've always insisted, let me conclude, I've always insisted that from the time I've sat on that commission, I have seen how this chairman, and I'm amazed at her degree, or the degree of tolerance and patience that she has manifested in terms of having one issue discussed several meetings over and over again ad nauseum, only at a certain point in time when she realizes that, look, we're not getting anywhere, there's a split, there's no consensual view emerging, and therefore it is time for a decision to be made.
Okay.
In the absence of the 3 of the 6 commissioners deciding, obviously the matter cannot continue for 20 other meetings. The chairman has to intervene and make a decision. And that is how, on a democratic basis, decisions are arrived at in the commission.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Roy. Mr. Alexander, you mentioned that the CEO, are you there?
I'm there very much.
You mentioned that the CEO and the DCO, what's DCO? What it means?
The Deputy Chief Election Officer.
Okay, and the legal officers, they're not qualified.
I didn't say the legal officer wasn't qualified.
Okay, the DCO
and the CEO and the DCO were not qualified at the time.
Okay.
When they were appointed.
Okay,
did not meet the criteria.
The DCO and the CEO, okay. The previous CEO and DCO were qualified?
First of all, the previous CEO was a consensus candidate. The previous CEO, I repeat, was a consensus candidate. The previous DCEO was qualified based on what GECOM stipulated.
Okay. Okay.
And I think, if GECOM is prepared, its records can be opened, both in terms of the applications, both in terms of its advertisement, and the public could make a judgment in that regard.
Okay. Let me go to a commercial break. Folks, stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. AllfromOneSupplier.com. One is the number one. Is where you can get all your West Indian foods, groceries, including roti, fish, curry, meat, you name it. You get it all from onesupplier.com. And home deliveries are all free across the country, the United States. You can use your EBT cards, your debit cards, and your credit cards. All from One Supplier is located at 10809 Liberty Avenue in Richmond Hill. The number is 718-551-3292. That's 718-551-3292. And let me go to my favorite, Globespan. They've been in business for over 30 years. So for all your traveling needs, hotel bookings and everything else, contact Globespan. Wherever you want to go, they will get you there. They have what is called upcoming tours to Dubai, India, South Africa, Norway, etc. They are also located at 109 Liberty Avenue in Richmond Hill. The number is 718-845-0437. 718-845-0437. That's Globespan. Been in business for 30 years. Leave all your traveling problems to them and they will solve it. In Georgetown, 227-1701. In Rosalton, 337-4287. And in Shaguna, in Trinidad and Tobago, 665-3383. And in Val Park, in Trinidad and Tobago, 645-1604. So leave, as I said, leave all your traveling problems to them. Now, Mr. Alexander, let me ask you this question, and I'll ask Mr. Roy the same question. The last election was held in 2020, which today suggests to me that GECOM had 5 years, goes down in 2020 March, 5 years to conduct the new registration. GECOM did not. Why?
Let me say two things. There's a question which Commissioner Rui posed about Justice Patterson, the late Justice Patterson. I wish to say that the late Justice Patterson never presided over a national, general and regional election. Justice Patterson was never faced with the plethora of decisions that are made when you have to deal with regional, general and regional elections. And therefore, it is difficult to make a comparison between Justice Patterson in terms of decision-making and anyone else, given the short period of his term and given the fact that he didn't preside over a period, that intense period of the preparation for national and regional elections. Now, I want to make another point. There is lots of people still don't understand, even political parties, that we are faced with an issue in terms of registration based on a judgment which says that we cannot delete names from the list other than for those who have died and we have the documentation to show that they would have died. We can't delete names other than in such a circumstance. So we have to understand that what we're talking about in Guyana presently is a process of continuous registration, building upon a database that was established in 2008. So we have a database of names from 2008 to present, minus the reported dead. The problem we're faced with is that we do not have mechanisms in place for the deletion from that list of overseas Guyanese who would have died. And I will contend that that is in the tens of thousands between 2008 and 2025. There's no mechanism. So that our list, when people refer to a bloated list, what a large extent they're speaking about is a list that has overseas Guyanese, in particularly the dead overseas Guyanese, who would be in tens of thousands. And there is no mechanism to take those names off of the list. And GECOM has been extremely lethargic in confronting this question, which in fact I have placed on the agenda. How do we get off those names, particularly in the circumstance where the APNU AFC at the end of the 2020 elections purported that there were people voted for who were not in the country. And not only did they purport, but two sets of their lists of such persons were submitted to the chief immigration officer, who verified that on each of those lists, approximately 80% of the persons, by the records of the chief immigration officer, were not in the country. And GECOM has refused to take that into consideration in its decision-making process and contends that that's a matter for a petition. And when I say GECOM here, I mean the chairperson and probably 3 commissioners. So that here is, let's assume that it is not true. Let's assume that the chief immigration officer corrupted the process. But here's the allegation. And we have not even consented to a proper discussion on how this matter could be resolved if in fact it does exist. And it is passing strange that the Attorney General corralled from GECOM thousands of other names which were sent with the accusation that those persons were overseas at the time. He's corralled that, and in corralling it, he told this nation in his normal propaganda exercise that all of these names are fraudulent representation by the AFC, APNU AFC, and that he will prove them to be fraudulent. In fact, he does have the capacity to make that determination because he can now send them to the chief immigration officer, an officer whose confidence the government has, and let him determine by the records, which are statutory records that are kept by immigrations. But for 2 years, he's gone patently silent on this matter. So it does suggest that there is some basis to the accusation, given the fact that the first 2 lists, the then chief immigration officer confirmed that about 80% of those persons were in fact not in the country. And so any contention by anyone else that, well, we found some people who are in the country only confirms what the chief immigration officer said, that it was 80% and not all. So indeed you can find some, as some people have claimed that they have done. So our problem is, how do we, in the circumstance of those accusations, and in the circumstance of not being able to delete names by a registration process, how do we ensure that the people who turn up to vote are indeed the registered persons? And my contention is that in those circumstances, given the decision of the court, etc., we have to introduce mechanisms. And that is why I have continuously argued for biometrics. Because what biometrics will do for us is to provide for identification of the voters at the place of poll digitally. And it would remove human beings whom Jack Dio has accused in the past and who was the AFC, AAP, and you have accused in the more recent past from being able to cast fraudulent votes. And so in that way, though the list continues to have names of persons who would have died, and the judgment is we can't remove them unless we can prove that they died, and there's no effort to find out those who have died. We will have a situation where that mechanism for voting would block people who seek to cast fraudulent votes, as has been suggested. And so far, there is evidence that has not been refuted, occurred in 2020. So what we need to do is not a new registration in the present circumstance, but to put mechanisms in place to ensure that the register which we have does not provide for people to cast fraudulent votes. We also have this problem, something GECOM had discussed in the past, of identification cards being renewed. The fact of the matter is, the present identification cards go back to 2008. And a large number of those cards can hardly really be used for facial recognition. So if somebody turns up with one of those cards, the name is listed, blah, 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 we can't resort to facial recognition. And that's another weakness in our system that needs to be addressed. Of course, the issue of digital identification, fingerprint identification, would resolve that problem as well. But another way to deal with that problem is for us to have ID cards that have term limits so that we renew ID cards so that we have up-to-date pics of the registrants, pics which can be effectively used on polling day to determine who's turned up. I would argue that our present collection of pics cannot be effectively used, and therefore a range of issues arise. Those can be used. People can use other people's ID cards. We have evidence suggesting that this has occurred. So there's a matrix of things that suggest we ought to pay attention to the electoral roll, at minimum to ensure that people who are not eligible do not cast a vote. At maximum, to review our system to see at the constitutional level if we can remedy this question of not having new registration periodically.
Okay, Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I want to ask you this question. There's a bloated list. Guyana has about 790,000 people. And the figures I'm seeing, 691,000 are eligible voters. Mr. Alexander is saying that there's a recent ruling where you cannot delete names from the list. But do you think that GECOM should say, you know what, let's go and do a brand new registration in the past 5 years they had and get a brand new list and we'll work with the new list. So you don't have to delete names from the old list. You just put the old list aside and you get a brand new list to work with. Don't you think that would be smart on behalf of GECOM? If they have a vision of the future, you don't have to go and delete any names. Just go and do a brand new registration across the country. And that new registration will be the people or persons eligible to vote based on the information you received. Don't you think that would be wise, Mr. Roy?
What you're asking there is exactly what the PNC would like to see happen. And that is why they would like, there seem to be maneuvering for either postponement of the elections or a delay in the, or no elections at all, because I've heard leaders from the opposition say, better no elections than the kind of elections that's going to be held in 2020.
Oh, you mean, let me cut you. Oh, you mean postpone the elections?
Pardon? Because if elections are constitutionally due by a particular date, as announced by the president, and the parliamentary process kicks in and so forth,
right.
Then if all these things are done by what Commissioner Alexander is advocating, you will never have elections on the
No, but I'm asking for registration.
Right, but I mean, registration is part of the electoral process, but okay, let's come to that. No, to do a new, first of all, for you to do that would require a decision of the commission. Now, all of those issues which Commissioner Alexander has raised have been discussed. Most of them have been discussed at the level of the commission or in the courts. If it has been discussed at the level of the commission, a decision has been taken no to proceed on them. And if it has been discussed in the court has thrown them out. Let's go through them one by one. The question of a bloated list, this so-called bloated list, is not exactly how it is being described. Because if you have continuous registration, and in the course of the continuous registration, you have a claims and objections period, where a person can make claims, they can make objections to names on the list. A person would have passed away, relative would have come forward and say, look, this relative of mine has passed away. Here is the death certificate. That matter is processed through the GRO, the General Register Office. It's proven that the person has died. The information is filtered to GECOM, and therefore a particular process kicks in with respect to the deletion in accordance with the Representation of the People Act. So there's a process for the removal of name. You can have a person who may have died overseas. The relatives return to Guyana, inform the GECOM and the GRO that this person has died, and therefore they understand that the person's name is still on the list, and they would like to have the name removed from the voters list or from whatever the list might be. So that can happen. Maybe it will not happen en masse, as Mr. Alexander would like to see it happen. But it's not to say that it does not happen.
Okay,
or you
Mr.
don't
Roy,
have occurrences
Mr.
of
Roy,
that sort.
let me just interject here, and I'm fair.
Yeah.
I am not taking no sides. The
Yeah.
point I'm trying to make is this. We cannot tell the rest of the world we have 96,000 people and 700,000 are eligible to vote. It's
Why not?
ridiculous. We become the laughing stock of the world. What I'm saying
that's
to you
not,
is
that's
this.
not true.
No, I want you to listen to me. That's what I'm seeing on GECOM, 691,000 eligible to vote. So what I'm saying to you is this. The last election was in 2020. You know, I'm hearing all these things. But if the parties in Guyana have any sense of what I'm saying to you, respect for the people and the consciousness of the election, they should say, look, give GECOM the go ahead, go and register people start from 2022. So that by 2025, we have a brand new list and we'll work with that list. But I don't want to hear all this process and all this debate. Why this can't be done? This is my point. Why everything in Ghana is taking 10 years to be done and it can be done in 1 or 2 months. You tell me there's a process, a process. There's a different process. I'm saying GECOM had 5 years. It proves to me that GECOM is incompetent. The entire board of GECOM is incompetent. I have to say this. Go and register people and get a brand new list of the people out there to vote. And I don't want to hear about all this process. And biometrics is something that everybody should welcome. So my point is, I'm hearing all these political talks, all these propaganda, all these stuff. I'm saying to GECOM, you should have been the one to go and register people to vote. What process? Just go and register the people. It's as simple as that.
You finished? Are you true?
But I want to know why GECOM did not register the people to vote since 2022 to now. That's my question to you.
My response to you, Dr. Rose. You see, that's one of the reasons why I don't like to come on this program, on your program.
No, but Mr. Roy, that should not be a reason. You can't tell me what I'm saying to you is not reasonable.
Let me finish. You're getting highly political.
That
is what I've been trying to avoid.
I'm dealing with GECOM. No, I'm not involved in no politics in this.
You have been, by virtue of all that you've said so far in the last couple of minutes are highly coincidental with the political opposition. The political opposition.
Okay, stop right there. Maybe one thing I've said is opposition, political opposition.
No. I'm saying to you, Dr. Rhodes, with due respect, all that you've said just now over the past couple of minutes are issues that coincide 100% with what the opposition has been calling for.
Be specific. Be specific. Name me one thing I said. Be specific.
Excuse me?
Be specific.
I'm saying to you all that you've said so far.
Okay, name me one of all I've said, Mr. Roy. All I've said, Mr. Roy, GECOM should register people to vote. Is that political? I don't care which party, whatever it is. GECOM should register people to vote. Where is that political? Unless I don't know what political means.
You said that it appears as though GECOM is incompetent. That's a position that the political opposition has taken.
I don't care
taking that same position.
I don't care what the opposition said. To me, GECOM is incompetent.
But you're saying it. You're saying it. You can't say you don't care what they're saying and you're saying it. What is that?
But if you can't see something is wrong, that you can't register people to vote, you are having a list. 691,000 people out of 800,000 people. You see something wrong with that? And you tell me I'm political?
You're getting worked up unnecessarily.
I'm not getting worked up because I'm hearing all this process.
The rule of law must prevail.
And I'm hearing it from you and Mr. Alexander, not your Lord.
The rule of law must prevail at all times. Elections cannot be run on the basis of emotions. The rule of law must prevail at all times, whether it's a constitutional or whether it's the Representation of the People Act. Let us be guided by the law. If the court rules one way or the other, we have to abide by what the court says. If the electoral law says the election must be conducted in a particular matter, or if registration must be conducted in a particular manner, we have to do so, irrespective of whatever advocacy we might engage in. That's our right to advocate. But our advocacy cannot take precedence over the rule of law. Advocacy has to be done within the meaning of the law at all times. And what GECOM is doing, GECOM has never done anything illegally. Let Mr. Alexander tell us what GECOM has done that is illegal, or what illegal act that GECOM has committed, or what unconstitutional act the chairman has committed ever since the new commission has been installed from the 2020 elections. And finally, Mr. Alexander must also say why this advocacy which he's engaging in did not take place at the time when the APNU-FC was in the government from 2015 to 2020. You ask about registration.
I'm sorry about
people are not registering. Why didn't it take place between 2015 and 2020?
It should have taken place then. So the same thing I'm saying, it should have taken place between 2015 and 2020.
Yeah.
GECOM should have done it then too.
Why didn't it?
Well,
why didn't it take place then?
I'm not blaming political parties in this. I'm blaming GECOM.
Yeah, but you can't blame GECOM because GECOM is walking within the meaning of the law. And the law must take precedence over everything else, or else you'll be running into problem. Then Mr. Alexander and his crew will have the right to take GECOM to court. We have to avoid that.
But there's one thing I'll tell you, Mr. Roy. Don't paint me to say that I'm repeating what Abner is saying. That's very, very cheap to me.
No. All that you said just, I'm not going to refrain from saying that.
No, but I'm saying specifically
now on the question of voters
list, and I support what you're saying. GECOM should have done this in 20.
Biometrics, it's all coinciding with the opposition, political opposition.
GECOM should have done this in 2015 as well.
Political opposition. And that's
Mr.
why
Roy,
I
Mr. Roy,
continuously refuse
you
to
know,
come on
I
these
always realize
programs.
when people cannot find answers, they come to these cheap remarks. But I'm saying to you, GECOM should have done it in
What
2015
is
as
being
well.
cheap if I say the rule of law must prevail? What is cheap about that?
What rule of law?
What do you mean, what rule of law? The Constitution and the Representation of the People Act must guide the Commission at all times, irrespective of advocacy or how emotionally we might get on the question of elections.
So
That's the only way we could get it right.
You're telling me GECOM is an independent body, and GECOM cannot recommend to the government or governments, whichever government is in office, and to
GECOM
the
did so
opposition,
at the
that
time
we
when
need to register the people to vote?
Dr. Rose, GECOM did so at a time recently in 2022 when everyone was asked to submit recommendations on what kind of reforms ought to be taken in terms of changes to the law. As a result of that, GECOM made some recommendations. Mr. Alexander sat at a meeting that was convened at the Arthur Chung Conference Center and made a whole set of statements and recommendations that were listened to. The point is that these matters went to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General made a host of amendments to the electoral process, which we now have to live with until another time comes around for new amendments to be made. That's how it is going to be.
Okay, my last question, we run out of time. Why does it take weeks before we get the results of election? Today we have social media. We have all the instruments in place, but yet it takes like 2-3 weeks before we can certify an election. Why is it, Mr. Roy?
Ask Mr. Alexander what happened in the 2020 elections and why it took so long. No. This is important. It's factual. I'm not speculating here. Mr. Alexander would be the best person to answer what happened at the Ashman's building, why CARICOM had to send up a team here, and why recount had to take place at the Arthur Chung Conference Center, why the matter went to court up to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and why we have to wait so long in order to get the results of the elections. He must answer that.
Mr. Roy, let me say this.
He must answer that.
Let me say this to you. What happened at CARICOM in 2020, I don't support. I think it was totally lawless, reckless, and stupid to delay an election for 5 months because you thought you win and you can't produce your statement of polls. I'm not going there. But I'm saying to you, in 2015, it took weeks. Prior to that, it's always taken weeks. And in this election here, I'm anticipating it will take weeks again. Everybody knows what happened in 2020. And I made it clear, it was lawlessness. So I'm saying to you, why it takes GECOM so long to produce results. You see, the thing is, GECOM is an independent body. This is why I'm worried about being an independent body in Guyana. GECOM is an independent body. GECOM should send people out there in the remote areas. You have a cell phone, you check your statement of polls, you flash the results to us, like what's happening in the States, in Canada. Canada having election next Monday. And by 12 o'clock, you get the results who won the election. And Canada is the second largest country in North Inland space. Remote areas all over the place. So why can't GECOM do the same thing? Let's have cell phones and you flash the results back to GECOM headquarters and they declare the results.
Let's be positive. Let's be positive and optimistic and expect that the results of the 2020 elections will address those issues that you're talking about.
Okay, well, I agree with you on that. We can go back to 2020. We know what happened there. But in this year's election, I'm hoping that we can get the results, if not the same night, the next day. And not wait 3-4 weeks after, or 2 weeks after.
I agree.
Because, as I said, Canada is the second largest country on Earth after Russia. And I've lived in Canada most of my life.
I would prefer to take the position of the Rastaman, which is to have positive vibrations for the 2025 election results.
Right. So I'm saying to all and sundry, make sure you get cell phones to these people. They can take the statement of polls in every polling station and flash the results back to GECOM, and they could count the results.
The PPP did that. That's how we were able to have the results to contest against what Mr. Norton said he has, which he has never produced.
Okay. So we come to the end of the program. Mr. Roy, your closing remarks.
Well, I'd like to say this. I believe and I'm convinced that GECOM has a sturdy and a robust structure, has better trained officials, more experienced officials to ensure that we do not have a repetition of what took place in 2020. I know you don't want to go back to that, but it's part of our experience as a country. We do not want to go back there. We want to look ahead. And in looking ahead, it would seem to me that GECOM is well positioned to ensure that its constitutional mandate is fulfilled to the best of its ability. I myself, along with my two other commissioners, are serving there to ensure that GECOM fulfills its mandate in accordance with the law, both the Constitution and the Representation of the People's Act. We do not, and I myself do not want to see GECOM engage in any act that is illegal or unconstitutional, because that would be inviting trouble. So we want to avoid that. And my role, together with my colleagues, is to ensure that GECOM is a steady ship, that the chairman is given as much support as possible in order to ensure that the GECOM fulfills its mandate in fulfillment of its constitutional mandate, and with the full support and understanding of the electorate of Guyana. They must have confidence in the commission that it will do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Mr. Alexander?
What is being proposed by the commissioner is laughable. I would ask the question, I'm not questioning the capacity of the present staff, but I'm asking the question, when and where has this new and more training be done? It's laughable that someone would come here to say GECOM now has staff who are better trained. When was the training done? The training for 2025 has not started, and we have not had training post 2020. So when was that training done? And I identify that to say that much of what is said to us falls into that same mode of presenting to the public things which are not true about the GECOM. And so, for example, I attended a consultation at the Arthur Chung Center. I didn't represent GECOM at that consultation. And at that consultation, I did not consider to be a proper consultation. People were there. If we spent 2 hours at the consultation, the Attorney General spoke for 1.5. I didn't even have a chance when I indicated, when I asked my first question, I'd like to ask a second. I wasn't even allowed to ask a second question. There's a lot of facades and a lot of fake that takes place in this country in the name of democracy, when in fact it is only democratic centralism that prevails, where decisions are made outside of the corridors of government and are imposed upon GECOM in other places. Decisions about employment, for example, are high on the list. And once you prevail with decisions of employment, then you know what will happen with the system. The problem we have is not what was done. It's not what was done in terms of reform. It's what was not done in terms of reform. Lots of recommendations made over decades now have still not been addressed. And one such declaration is a question of how we deal with our voters list. The second such declaration is how we deal with a commission that has become irrelevant, a commission that cannot serve the purpose intended by our Constitution. So GECOM is in trouble, and while GECOM may be preparing for an election, I don't think GECOM has done what is required to prepare for a free and fair election.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for listening. I just want to let you all know I became a little irate there because it's not about politics. I am not concerned about party politics and those things in Guyana. I lived most of my life in North America. So what I want to say, what I was saying is this. GECOM is producing a list, 691,000 people eligible to vote out of 796,000 people. And you got over 250,000 are students. So you know that list is a bloated list. But what I've been told by both gentlemen here, that you cannot delete names from the list. A law has been passed, you cannot do that. My question is this, I want to know, is that law written in stone? So those are the things when I hear we are saying, I'm saying, you can only move a country forward if these little things, nuances are removed. Why is it that you can't remove it? You don't have to remove the names from the list, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Go and make a new list. Go and do a new registration, and you take that new list and you work with it. Leave that old list behind. You don't have to remove the names. But even to that extent, why am I being told that you can't delete names from the list? And the question is that law written in stone that it can be changed? So this is why these things, when I hear these things, I said, you know, what nonsense is this? Do what is right for the people and the country. I don't care which party, I don't care what race, for all Guyanese. I see people as Guyanese, all Guyanese. I don't want to see race, Indians, blacks, and whatever it is, all Guyanese. So if you can do what is right for Guyanese, then something is wrong with the cultural makeup of those political parties. Get rid of that list in the next election, send GECOM right after this election here, start doing registration for the next election. That's my conclusion. But don't come and tell me that you can't delete names from the list. You just have to add. How can you tell the world that you got 796,000 people and 691,000 eligible to vote? What are we doing as Guyanese to ourselves? Not making fools of ourselves? But having said that, I want to say this. Republic Bank. Those of you who have gone to Republic Bank should know there's a major, major problem there. The one in Georgetown on Camp and Rob Street got about 12 teller windows. And when you go there, only 2 and 3 tellers are there. And they have 200 people to serve. What probably some Guyanese don't know, and what the managers of Republic Bank don't know, people come from work to go there to do business with the bank. And they have other areas in the bank, it's always filled, all the seats are filled. When you kept people there for 3-4 hours, the country is losing production. The country is losing production. Why can't they fill all those teller windows, get rid of the people, and then send those tellers back to do their respective jobs? The same thing for the branch in Triumph. The same thing for the branch in Rosignol. The same thing for the branch in Hampshire. You go to any Republic Bank, and people waited there for 3-4 hours. I personally experienced that in Georgetown. I went there at 9 o'clock in the morning. I left at 11:45. I just want to test the system out. I could have gone to the ATM machine, but I just want to test the system out, how long people have to wait. And it is ridiculous. So that's my beef. Number 2, internet services in Guyana. When are we going to have proper internet services? It's been years now since internet came on the scene, and Guyana is still struggling. You can't have a conversation with someone for more than a minute, internet popped out. It's showing your phone reconnecting. When you say these things, people think that you're against government. I'm not against government. Government got nothing to do with this. These are the facts in Guyana. I've been calling people in Guyana almost every day, and it's happening to me almost every day. You know, so I'm saying the internet services, those who are looking after the internet services or in charge of it, should get proper services to the people. Why Guyanese have to always be this second and third class and fourth class to getting anything done? Why? You go to Barbados, the internet service working good. You go to Trinidad, the service. You go to Jamaica, you go to the service are working good. They don't have the problems like Guyana. Why in Guyana we having this problem? That's what the providers to know and should do. So that's my conclusion with that. Gentlemen, Mr. Alexander and Mr. Roy, thank you very much for coming on. And I'm sorry to hear you say, Mr. Roy, that's why you don't like to come on the program, but I will invite you again one way or the other. You're my favorite person on this program, one of them. So I will always invite you to come on this program. There's no hard feelings on my part. I am not aligned to say, well, I'm supporting the PNC on this program. No, we are neutral. We hear the views from all sides. And I wasn't going after you. I was telling you what both you and Mr. Alexander were telling me about GECOM and the deletion of the list. You can't delete names from the list. That was my thing. Mr. Alexander said it, you said it. And I don't know why. And if the laws are restricting GECOM, then those laws should be lifted and thrown out. That's my conclusion. So this is not a party issue, or I'm aligning with what Mr. Alexander is saying or what the party is saying. No. And I don't allow people to label me to any party, you know. So I want to make that clear to everyone. I must thank all our listeners for joining this program tonight, and our sponsors for making the contribution to make this program available, and to Noir Singh, who operates this program, and to Devin Bissoon and Ryan Kissoon, our two technical directors. And most of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Roy, for coming on here tonight, and also Mr. Alexander. Special thanks to both of you. It was a very, very good conversation, I think. It put lights on a lot of issues that a lot of people don't know about GECOM, but today it was clear to most people what is happening within GECOM and the electoral process. So, gentlemen, thank you all once again for being here, and have a pleasant rest of the evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome.